They said she looked too calm. They said she smiled too much. To the world, her face was the mask of a killer. But was Amanda Knox a murderer, or the victim of a story spun out of control? Kindly subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories. Now let's dive into the main story. It all began Perugia, Italy. A hilltop town of cobblestone streets, terracotta rooftops, and quiet piazzas. To the casual visitor, it looks like something from a postcard. But beneath its medieval charm, in the autumn of 2007, a horror was waiting to be uncovered. Amanda Knox had been in Perugia only a few weeks. A 20-year-old American exchange student, she had come to study, to experience Italy, to live a little. She shared a cottage with other students, including Meredith Kercher, a 21-year-old British student full of promise, wit, and kindness. On the morning of November 2, 2007, the cottage was strangely quiet. Amanda had spent the night at her new boyfriend Raffaele's apartment. When she returned, she noticed something odd. The front door was wide open. At first, it didn't strike her as alarming, a carefree spirited girl, maybe someone had left in a hurry. Maybe the wind. But then, she stepped inside. In the bathroom, she found drops of blood. Small, but enough to make her uneasy. She also noticed that someone had used the toilet, but hadn't flushed. Her unease grew. The place felt wrong. Still, she tried to rationalize it. Maybe one of the other roommates had a rough night. Maybe there was an explanation. But then came the locked door. Meredith's bedroom door. No matter how much Amanda and Raffaele knocked, there was silence. By now, worry was creeping into panic. They called the police. They called the landlord. Soon, officers arrived, forcing the door open. And inside, the nightmare revealed itself. Meredith Kercher was lying on the floor, partly covered by a duvet. Her throat had been cut. The room bore signs of a struggle. Blood on the floor, on the walls. A scene of violence no one could have imagined in this quiet student house. The news spread quickly. Students in Perugia whispered in fear. The media swarmed. Who could do such a thing? And in that moment, as Meredith's life was tragically cut short, the story that would entangle Amanda Knox for nearly a decade was just beginning. The discovery of Meredith Kercher's body sent shockwaves through Perugia. Police swarmed the little hillside cottage. Forensic teams in white suits moved in and out. Neighbors and students stood in the street, whispering in disbelief. Inside the house, Amanda Knox stood trembling. She had been the one to notice the blood. She had been the one to call for help. Now, she was answering questions, trying to make sense of what had happened. But almost immediately, the police noticed her behavior. Amanda wasn't breaking down in sobs. She wasn't hysterical. Instead, she appeared calm. Too calm, they thought. Outside the cottage, she kissed her boyfriend, Raffaele. She clung to him. To investigators, this looked suspicious. Why would a young woman, whose roommate had just been brutally murdered, act so composed? To Amanda, it was simply shock. To the police, it was a red flag. Within hours, attention began to turn on Amanda and Raffaele. They were young. They were new to town. They didn't have solid alibis. And in the tense atmosphere following the murder, suspicion didn't need much fuel to catch fire. Then came the first interrogation. Detectives pressed Amanda about her night with Raffaele. She said they had been together. Watching movies. Smoking hash. Sleeping late into the morning. But police didn't believe them. Their stories seemed too rehearsed. Details shifted slightly under pressure. And in the eyes of Italian investigators, this was a sign of deceit. The press, hungry for a headline, pounced. Amanda's life in Perugia became front-page news. Journalists combed through her social media, her MySpace page, even her diary. they discovered her childhood nickname, Foxy Knoxy. To Amanda, it was a harmless name from her teenage football days. To the tabloids, it was a perfect hook. They painted her as cunning, seductive, dangerous. Soon, the public wasn't seeing Amanda Knox, the frightened exchange student. They were seeing Foxy Knoxy, the femme fatale who had allegedly lured Meredith into a night of sex and violence. And so, with hardly any hard evidence, Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito found themselves at the center of a murder investigation that would grip the world. The stage was set. And the storm was only just beginning. The murder of Meredith Kercher consumed Perugia. Journalists from Italy, Britain, and the United States crowded the narrow streets. Police, under pressure to solve the case, looked inward, at the people closest to Meredith. And at the center stood Amanda Knox. On November 5, 2007, just days after the body was found, Amanda was summoned to the police station for what she thought would be routine questioning. She was tired, disoriented, still reeling from the shock. What followed, however, was anything but routine. The interrogation stretched deep into the night. Hours of questioning. Hours without sleep. Amanda's Italian was limited, her English not always understood by the detectives. Voices were raised. Tempers flared. Amanda was told her memory was unreliable. That she was lying. That Raffaele had already changed his story, distancing himself from her. The walls began to close in. After hours of relentless pressure, Amanda's mind fractured under the strain. In a dazed, confused state, she suggested a name, Patrick Lumumba, her boss at a local bar where she worked part-time. In that moment, Amanda placed herself at the scene of the crime. Not through clear memory, but through what she later described as a haze, a vision planted during interrogation. She wrote a statement saying she remembered being in the cottage while Patrick killed Meredith. The police had what they wanted. A confession, of sorts. But it was deeply flawed. There was no evidence linking Patrick Lumumba to the crime. He had an airtight alibi, dozens of witnesses saw him at his bar that night. Within days, he was released. For Amanda, however, the damage was irreversible. She had falsely implicated an innocent man. And worse, she had placed herself inside the murder scene. The media exploded. Headlines screamed, "American Girl Confesses." The narrative of Foxy Knoxy hardened. From that night on, Amanda Knox was no longer just a witness. She was now a suspect. Amanda Knox was no longer free. Just a week after Meredith Kercher's body was discovered, Amanda, Raffaele, and Patrick Lumumba were all arrested. Though Patrick would soon be cleared, Amanda and Raffaele remained behind bars. The Italian authorities presented a shocking theory. They claimed the murder was the result of a twisted game, a sexual encounter gone wrong. Amanda was painted as the ringleader. The so-called Foxy Knoxy had seduced Meredith into a night of drugs and lust, the police said, before turning violent. It was sensational. It was scandalous. And it made for irresistible headlines. But there was a problem. The physical evidence didn't match the story. Fingerprints, footprints, and DNA inside the crime scene pointed not to Amanda or Raffaele, but to another man entirely, Rudy Guide, an Ivory Coast-born drifter with a history of break-ins. His bloody handprint was on Meredith's bedsheet. His DNA was found inside her body. Guide was arrested in Germany weeks later, fleeing the country. His connection to the crime seemed undeniable. And yet, Italian prosecutors refused to let Amanda and Raffaele go. They argued that Guide could not have acted alone. They insisted Amanda and Raffaele were part of a murderous trio. Their evidence: Amanda's strange behavior, her inconsistent statements, and a knife from Raffaele's kitchen that investigators claimed matched Meredith's wounds. By 2009, the trial was underway. The courtroom in Perugia became a theater of spectacle. Rows of journalists filled the benches, sketch artists captured Amanda's every move, and the prosecution leaned heavily into the image of a cunning, manipulative femme fatale. Every smile Amanda gave, every whisper to her lawyers, was dissected by the press. If she smiled, she was cold. If she cried, it was an act. If she stayed silent, it was defiance. The pressure was immense. And as the trial dragged on, the case became less about hard evidence, and more about perception. Then, in December 2009, the verdict was read. Amanda Knox, guilty. Raffaele Sollecito, guilty. Amanda was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Raffaele received 25 years. The courtroom gasped. Some cheered. Some cried. And for Amanda Knox, the walls of her cell in Cappan prison closed in tighter than ever before. She was 22 years old, and facing the prospect of spending most of her life behind bars for a crime she swore she didn't commit. Cappan prison. A grey fortress on the outskirts of Perugia. Behind its stone walls, Amanda Knox began what seemed to be a lifetime sentence. She was just 22, far from home, and labeled by the world as a killer. Life inside was harsh. Amanda lived in a small cell, locked away for most of the day. She kept a diary, studied Italian, and tried to hold on to fragments of normality. But prison is not a place for peace of mind. She was ridiculed by fellow inmates, constantly monitored, and haunted by the memory of Meredith, her friend who had become the center of a nightmare. Outside the prison walls, the case was fueling a firestorm. The Italian press cast Amanda as the cold, calculating she-devil. British tabloids, protective of Meredith, ran lurid headlines painting Amanda as guilty beyond doubt. In the United States, however, a different picture emerged, a young American girl caught in a miscarriage of justice. The world was divided. Meanwhile, Amanda's legal team began preparing an appeal. Their central argument was clear: the evidence against her and Raffaele was fatally flawed. The so-called murder weapon, the kitchen knife taken from Raffaele's apartment, had no traces of Meredith's blood. Its DNA results were contested, weak, and contaminated. The bra clasp that prosecutors claimed carried Raffaele's DNA. It had been left on the floor for weeks before being collected, wide open to contamination. And the third man, Rudy Guide, was not a ghost. He had already been convicted in a separate fast-track trial. The evidence tied him directly to the killing. He admitted being there that night, though he insisted he didn't kill Meredith. Still, the question loomed: if the evidence pointed to Guide, why were Amanda and Raffaele still behind bars? The appeal opened in 2010, nearly 3 years after Amanda's arrest. New forensic experts were brought in. Their findings rocked the courtroom. They concluded the DNA used to convict Amanda and Raffaele was unreliable, compromised by poor police work and contamination. As these revelations spread, the tide began to turn. Even some Italian commentators, once convinced of Amanda's guilt, began questioning the case. The world watched as the fragile foundation of the prosecution's narrative started to crumble. But Amanda, inside her cell, could only wait. Days blurred into months. Months into years. She read books, wrote letters, and clung to the hope that the truth would finally break through. By the summer of 2011, the appeal verdict approached. And with it, Amanda's last chance for freedom. It was the autumn of 2011. For long years had passed since Meredith Kercher's murder. For years of headlines, trials, accusations, and prison walls. Now, Amanda Knox's fate hung in the balance once again. The appeal trial had lasted months. Experts had dismantled much of the prosecution's forensic evidence. The defense argued that Rudy Guide, already convicted, was the sole killer. And the international spotlight was burning brighter than ever. The day of the verdict, the courtroom in Perugia overflowed. Journalists, cameras, and reporters packed into every corner. The tension was suffocating. Amanda sat pale and trembling, clutching the hand of her lawyer. Raffaele Sollecito, beside her, looked just as hollowed by years of fear. The judge entered. The crowd fell silent. One by one, the charges were read. And then, the words Amanda had been praying for. Not guilty. Amanda collapsed into tears. Her mother sobbed. The courtroom erupted with gasps and shouts. Some celebrated. Others screamed in outrage. After nearly 4 years behind bars, Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito were free. The scene outside the prison that night was electric. Amanda, wide-eyed, stepped into the night air for the first time in years. She was rushed into a car, driven past a mob of flashing cameras and shouting journalists. Within days, she was on a plane home to Seattle. At the airport, crowds of supporters gathered to welcome her. Amanda wept as she spoke, "Thank you to those who have believed in me, who have defended me, who have supported my family." But freedom came with a heavy price. To many in Italy, Amanda was still guilty in their eyes. To Meredith's family, the acquittal was devastating. They believed justice had not been served. And around the world, the debate only deepened. Was Amanda Knox an innocent victim of a broken investigation? Or had a clever manipulator slipped through the cracks of justice? Amanda was free, yes. But the shadow of Meredith's murder would follow her forever. Amanda Knox was free, but the story was far from over. When she returned home to Seattle in 2011, she tried to rebuild her life. She studied, wrote a memoir, and appeared on television to share her side of the ordeal. To many Americans, she was the symbol of a wrongful conviction. But in Italy, the case still burned like an open wound. Prosecutors appealed the acquittal. And in 2014, the unimaginable happened. Italy's highest appeals court overturned Amanda's freedom and reinstated her conviction, sentencing her once again, this time to 28 years. Amanda, watching the news from the United States, was stunned. She had been acquitted and released, and now, she was being condemned again, this time from thousands of miles away. The legal ping-pong was bewildering. In the eyes of Italian law, Amanda Knox was guilty once more. But she refused to return to Italy. Extradition remained a looming threat. Her life became a strange limbo, balanced between freedom and the shadow of another prison cell. Then came 2015. Italy's Supreme Court delivered a final ruling. And this time, after years of chaos, confusion, and controversy, they cleared Amanda Knox and Raffaele Sollecito once and for all. The judges admitted the case had been plagued by stunning flaws in the investigation, evidence handling, and reasoning. The nightmare that had begun in 2007 was, at last, legally over. Amanda was free forever. Still, freedom did not mean peace. Meredith Kercher's family, heartbroken, insisted their daughter's justice had been denied. The media circus never stopped. Amanda lived under constant scrutiny, her name forever bound to a murder she did not commit. Today, Amanda Knox speaks openly about wrongful convictions, criminal justice reform, and the devastating cost of trial by media. She has built a life, married, with children, but she will never escape the label the world gave her. And Meredith Kercher? Her name is often lost in the noise. Yet, behind every headline and every verdict, she remains the true victim, a young woman with dreams and a future stolen far too soon. The story of Amanda Knox is not just about one girl accused of murder. It is about the fragility of truth, the power of perception, and the thin line between freedom and a lifetime behind bars.